everybody, welcome to Downtime Activities. I'm Will, this is Matt, and welcome to the Bonus Action Podcast, where we sit down and have the conversations we sort of have anyway about storytelling and tabletop RPGs in particular, just with a little bit of direction and an attempt to limit ourselves to be close to an hour.
Ish.
We don't always hit that mark.
And sometimes we go a little over, but
we tend to go over.
Yeah.
Almost always. This time we're talking about something that is very near and dear to my heart when it comes to running tabletop RPGs, and something that I feel like really adds a lot of player investment and a lot of sort of spice and flavor to virtually any tabletop game, no matter the system you're using, and that's visuals and handouts, stuff like maps or letters. I really love this type of stuff, and I know you've always made something of an effort to include some of this stuff in your campaign, and it's felt like that's been ramping up somewhat over the past few campaigns that we've run.
Yes. I think that it's something that people think they won't get as much mileage out of it as they really will. It feels oftentimes, I think, for people, especially people who haven't run games for very long, like something that's going to be a lot of effort and not a huge payoff. But I think oftentimes, especially if you have a couple of like strategies and how you go about doing it, it doesn't have to be a massive amount of effort, and you will get a huge payoff. And if you make it a massive amount of effort, you might get an even bigger payout.
And, quite often if you're putting a massive amount of effort into it, it's for you and not necessarily for the player.
It's also just enjoyable.
It is. I really enjoy creating things that feel like they're part of the world. Which is why, I bought a stack of, like, map-sized, like, parchment back in the day. That ran me, like, $15 for 30 sheets or whatever. Because I loved putting the effort into making these big, hand-drawn fantasy world maps and having them at the table and using them to show off the world. It's a lot of effort. It takes a lot of time, but it's something that feels like it's part of the world.
Absolutely.
And it helps the players sort of have that little element of buy-in. When a courier shows up and hands somebody a sealed letter, that's an entirely different feeling than just having the letter read by the game master when that moment comes up.
Mm-hmm. I think before, I'd like to go into like a bunch of examples and like ideas, but first I want to talk about like how you go about handing it to the players, because I think that that's also something that could get missed with visuals and things along those lines. Sometimes having maps drawn and spread across the table at the beginning of kind of session one, so people kind of have an idea of what the world looks like, is a useful thing. But I think especially the stuff you put a lot of effort into and try and make look like a real piece of the world, you wait until they get that piece of the world in game to hand it to them. And that's the moment that I think if you're a person who likes making this stuff and likes to get the buyout back off of it, that's the moment you live for. Is that moment when they're like, yeah, I want to try and get a map of the area so we have a better idea where to go. And they go to the local goods shop, pay for the map, and you're like, okay, it'll run you 25 gold pieces. And you bend over and pick up this big roll of paper and hand it to your party. That moment is what you're kind of doing that for. And they're unveiling and like, oh, look at it, and like that is what it's all about.
They're digging around the wizard's desk and they find a letter, and you hand them the letter at sort of the moment they find it. It's you can get a lot of mileage, and it's something that I do quite often just to help players understand what they're looking at by setting up a TV. If you have a little TV laying around, like for some reason we have a couple.
Just random little junky old TVs.
Hooking it up to my laptop, running an HDMI into it, and just having a bunch of stuff sort of prepared in a PowerPoint that I can just throw up when those moments come up. In my Treasure Planet campaign, I found really like beautiful pictures of ship models of the types of ships that you guys would be encountering. So if you guys found a first-rate ship of the line, I had a picture of that specific ship to show you,
as well as flags for the ships,
as well as making the flags, and that just helps all the players to immediately understand what they're looking at. And then when you see sails on the horizon and you can just bring up a picture of a ship, all of a sudden players are like, we've seen that ship before.
Or we've seen that flag before.
Right. We need to get out of here. Or, I bet I know who that is. It gives rise to immediate revelations without having to just, tell them who it is or what it is they're looking at. And it just helps to cement in everybody's mind what they're seeing and what the world looks like. I think, by and large, having visuals that you pass across at the right moment tends to be better and tends to land with greater impact.
And the way I look at it, that's a good example of one of what I would say are basically the three types of visuals that exist. I think there are kind of three broad categories of what visuals are. One is things that just show the players the world as it is, gives them a physical, visual example of what their characters are seeing. The second is a tool, and maps tend to be that. Maybe things along the lines of maps or layouts or things that kind of give a tool that can be used to help traverse the world or solve problems. And then the third handout visual thing is the problem. It's the puzzle that you give them physical pieces to that they need to solve. And it may be a tool in and of itself and how they can use it to solve other things, but it's kind of the three broad categories. And there's a ton that you can get out of all three of those.
Absolutely.
And the same types of visuals, a map could be all three of those.
Absolutely. That's just what I was going to mention, is quite often good visuals are crossing those lines. And if you can, work hard to make as many visuals as possible, in particular those latter two categories also fit that first category of showing the players the world and showing them the look and feel of the story that you're telling.
But Will, I don't have massive map parchment, and I don't have $30 to spend on it. How could I ever make a visual that looks like it belongs in a fantasy world if I don't have parchment lying around and a quill and sealing wax?
Well, a sheet of printer paper and a little bit of cheap black tea and a nice marker that won't run when it gets wet, or a good pen that won't run when it gets wet, tends to be all you need in most cases. That's kind of the thing about visuals. I mean, heck, you can use plain white printer paper with pen and get a lot of good feel across and really help the players understand what they're looking at. It doesn't look like something that came straight out of the story that you're telling. But it absolutely serves a purpose. And that purpose is arguably more important, just because it's doing what it needs to do with no frills. If you want to make stuff that looks good, there are so many tutorials online of how to make paper look old, how to make maps look old, how to hand draw maps, how to, start learning how to do mountains or how to do trees and stuff like that. And that's really all you need. You don't need much of anything. If you feel like putting a little money into it and feel like putting more effort into it, you will see that rewarded. But by and large, it's not super necessary.
And you can get a lot of mileage out of pretty simple things. Let's talk about some examples. Let's break down some of the... I think that there's the big world map, or kind of the area of the world you're in, the map of that'll kind of give you cities and kind of roads, rivers, mountain ranges, things along those lines. If you know your game master really well, you'll look at it and you'll be like, I know three things. Something's going on here, and the secret lost city's in this mountain range over here. And you'll be right on all three and feel really good about yourself. What are some other things that you think are really good examples? What are other examples from our games?
The clues for traps are classic. Whether it's just sort of, printing out the diagram of the pattern in the floor, so the players can attempt to decipher it to figure out where the traps are, or printing out the riddle so that the players can, or even handwriting out the riddle so the players can reference it.
Especially if
without
the riddle
you having to read it constantly.
Visual pieces of it that are part of solving it.
Floor plans, kind of fitting in with the map thing. Clues, whether about the world or about sort of the specific, problem the players are dealing with at that time. And letters are big, like just sort of broad categories. Letters, you can really get a lot of mileage out of presenting your players with a letter of, from a nobleman or from their enemies. Printing out contracts is something that we've seen recently, and having all the players sign them in character. It's stuff that helps. It just helps to reinforce these elements of world building. We have some. I don't know if you want to go over some crazier examples from stuff we've done in the past, or
we can definitely. I mean, the one that I think is not particularly crazy. It's an older one that I think. Is a really good lesson to learn off of visuals, a cool tool you can use with them, is from an older campaign I ran, in the Return to Dracos campaign, just for your own kind of frame of reference, where there was kind of this big vault break-in section, and there was kind of a map of the vault that you guys were able to steal. But there was also another thing that you stole from this place. That was kind of the reason to go there. That was this piece of paper that had information on this kind of hidden away, desert-covered Mad Mage tomb kind of deal. And it had lots of clues built into it about what each of the rooms that were in this place might have in store for you, and kind of gave you some advice. And something I did with that in and of itself is just a cool handout to have, and cool to kind of let the players start to come up with, oh, what is this? Is this something to do with illusion? And this has something to do with darkness, and this has something to do with plants. And these things they can kind of maybe slant what spells they prepare and things like that to try and be prepared for this, and they might be surprised by what it actually is. But what I did with that one in particular is it was something that was not found by them first. And so it had notes written on it in a different ink of the person who found it and was trying to solve it before them. And this is a really cool tool you can use. The same thing with maps, where you take a map and you have everything etched out in black ink, and then there's this red ink section where there's an X with like a skull, and then there's another section that has exclamation point put there, and all of a sudden there's no key to this map, but there's clearly stuff been added to it, and you could go to those locations and see what it is, what they were marking, or what they were trying to avoid.
And even if there is a key or there's notes penned in the margins, maps are an excellent place to. And again, it's like it's a little bit of world building. This isn't just a map of the region. This is a map of the region that was owned by somebody else, and they've put all of these sort of oddly specific notes or stylized notes into the margins of it and marked out things on it. Rivers or towns that weren't there before. And that gives the players things that they want to go look at because somebody else thought it was important enough to mark it down, as well as just another layer of buy-in.
It also can just add another puzzle.
Absolutely.
All of a sudden there's this cryptic note, there's a city marked that's not marked on any other maps you find, and a cryptic note about it. You go there and you don't see a city. Why is there a city marked here? What does this note mean? What's the secret? What's the riddle behind this? Something I remember as part of getting into that tomb, I don't know if you remember this, the thing I decided to do at the time, because
I do remember some sort of teleport puzzle, but I don't remember what the weird code phrase was.
So the thing was, there's this like teleport pad that you had to say the correct code phrase in order to teleport into this tomb, basically, into this dungeon. And the person who had gotten it had this strange, I think I used like a English to Draconic translator to get these strange runes that I hand drew on there. But the person wrote next to it with like an arrow pointing at that section, "What?" ? And everyone was kind of like, he doesn't know this language either. He's wondering, what is this strange passcode? But the passcode was, you had to say the word "what" as a question. It was him translating the passcode for you. So eventually, after messing with this for a while, one of you guys was like, stood on there and went like, what? And like didn't work, and like, what? And then the person just vanished and disappeared and reappeared into this place. Things like that, although that's a fairly goofy example, having weird little like things that are clues, but maybe misleading clues that you have to really think in a different way or a more elaborate way. Because if somebody's just writing a little note on their thing, they know why they wrote that note that way. They're not writing this hoping that someone will find it on their dead body and be able to use it to get the treasure they wanted. This is something they wrote for themselves. So you don't have to have a ton of detail in it, just enough to be helpful, but potentially confusing, and something that players have to solve and feel good when they do so.
Well, and there's an excellent moment in, if you've ever seen, it's a classic kind of adventure film called Romancing the Stone. A lot of people don't want to watch it because it's like, that sounds like a romance movie. But it's about a author who writes essentially bad romances. Her sister gets kidnapped. But right before she gets kidnapped, she like sends her a treasure map. So she goes to Colombia, runs into this just like rough and tumble like adventurer dude, and they go on this grand quest being chased by this like brutal like police colonel and this other gang of criminals to recover this like huge heart-shaped emerald. It's fantastic action and comedy film. It's Danny DeVito and like it's really wonderful. But there's a really cool part with the map where if you fold the map in a certain way, there's a picture of like the Virgin Mary with baby Jesus up in one like corner of the map. But if you fold it in a certain way, it meets up with another picture on the back and forms a picture of a waterfall, which is how they eventually find the treasure. And I've always wanted to make a map that did the same way, where it's like sort of, because you could pre-fold it. You can put the creases into the map to make the players want to sort of like, when they get it, it's like, why was it folded this way? And you can, if you have any artistic ability, you can really play around with hiding clues relatively deep into your maps in that way. And pairing handouts works great for this. I gave my players a handout in the first big campaign that I ran that had a smaller map drawn in it, which made the players go back to the large overworld map with this like, there's no way it's like he drew the same mountains on both. Like, there's no way that this map matches to a place like on the world map. And then it's you and Matty G sitting there looking at the map, and it's like, wait a second. It's here. It's
right here. It's right here.
And we know that there's something there because we've been there. So then, off you run back to that location. But I'm not going to tell the players to, look at the map or to correspond the two. It requires the players to sort of figure that out on their own. But it makes them feel clever for figuring it out, and it makes you feel clever for hiding something like that in the maps that you make.
Absolutely, and it allows your visuals to kind of serve dual purpose. Mm-hmm. Like, we didn't have to find that in order to progress the story, but doing it gave us a lot more background information and some more knowledge about the whole situation at large. But separately, like, that big map was useful. That was our world map. That's how we knew where places were, how long it would take us to get to places. So it's kind of dually using kind of these different visual elements to have multiple purposes and multiple things to be solved about them. Maps and kind of codex, clues, blueprints, those kinds of things, really useful. We mentioned contracts. That's a very recent one in the Skygate campaign that's live on the channel right now. I wrote up 2 different contracts that were kind of about the business they were joining and handed it to the players. I had a physical piece of paper that the players got to write and sign. Everyone signed pretty cool in character, and like one of the characters is not very learned and kind of signed a little odd and like not like the best spelling of their name or like with capitals and things like that. Somebody else drew a small thing at the end to show them stamping their signet ring because they were of nobility. Things along those lines where like you kind of had this true in-character signing from a lot of people. That was really cool, and it'll be a fun just thing to hold on to moving forward. And that feels like it took me some time to make, but I kind of found another example of a contract like that and then rewrote a big chunks of it to make it fit for mine.
Well, and if you're a game master, you're probably something of a writer anyway, or at least sort of bordering on that. And it's a really fun writing challenge to try and sit down and write something that feels authentic to the world that it's in, on the large scale and on the small scale. Letters are an excellent example of that. Trying to write a letter that feels accurate, whether it's between 2 characters or from another character addressing the party. Then contracts are the same way. It's this thing that you want to... You're not writing it for the players at the table. You're writing it for the characters in the world. And that's its own little fun writing challenge. And doing it, in sort of a weird way really pays off. I mean, look at... the Hobbit movies are not great. First one's fine, But there's an excellent moment at the beginning of the first one where Bilbo's reading this huge, long contract that they're having him sign to go on this adventure, and he's reading the list of, like,
ways of death,
ways he could die. And, like, and there's a great moment because that list goes on, but for some reason the one that really sticks him up is incineration. And, like, your players get those, you know, it's the contracts that you made. There's excellent clauses in there about, like, if you just, like, get your mind stolen,
rendered, like, no longer sentient, or
right.
like spiritual transference or interplanar banishment.
Right.
These things are covered.
Like, and it's fun to find those clauses in, because it makes sense. You're in a fantasy tabletop RPG world. It's like, that stuff's a little more common than it is in our regular world. But it's fun for players to run into that stuff in the contract that this NPC is making them sign. It's fun to try and decipher what's what an NPC means in a vaguely written letter, especially if it's using really odd language, or if it's, you know, referencing, like, really oddly specific fantasy things. It's a writing challenge for the game master. It feels satisfying to complete it for the game master, and it's fun for the players to, like, read through. And really, that's visuals and handouts are as much for the game master as they are for the players.
You should enjoy making them.
Yes. You know, and if you enjoy putting the effort into them, it doesn't feel like a chore to make really needlessly involved things. Somebody, it might write a book for
or
a D&D
3.
campaign.
Before we get into extreme examples, one other thing I want to briefly touch on when speaking of contracts, letters as well, but specifically contracts. If you're going to do the whole devil contract deal, write it out. Write it out word for word. There's lots of examples online of people who have done it that you can steal and change to make fit yours, and hand it to your player and make them sign it. Because that is going to be, like, that deal with the devil signing means so much more. If they physically pick up a pen and write their character's name on that sheet of paper that you singe the corners of with a lighter and damp out before it goes out, so it shows the kind of sign of fire damage on it, and you hand them this infernal contract and their character has to sign it. Those kind of things, it just makes it a moment so much more than just describing, my character walks over and signs it. It's like, no, sign it. And you hand them the contract.
I don't recommend, pinning a wanted poster to the wall of your room with an arrow, but...
You know, if you can find, like, a thumbtack with some like feather flange out the back of it and stick on it, go for it. Put it on your, like, cork board or whatever.
A magnet that is just half of a dagger blade.
That'd be... Why does... Trademark.
we should
absolutely make
we should
that.
at least do some Googling when this is over.
This should exist if it doesn't.
Makes those, because that sounds awesome. But that also brings us to wanted posters, which wanted posters are, by and large, if you have a printer, a really low effort way to get wonderful reactions out of the players, and it's something they want to hold on to. Our entire Devils of the West posse. Everybody held on to their specific wanted poster as those sort of trickled in over the course of the campaign.
Until eventually literally everyone had one.
That's part of the way when we're setting up for another session that I know where to put everybody's character sheets, because we have a big stack of character sheets, and it's just like, okay, these are all the ones with the Grimes wanted posters. That's over here. And here's all the ones, here's the sheets and the Professor Bogus wanted posters. That goes over there. People want to keep those, and sooner or later we're going to put them up on the wall. Just because, like, I had a ton of fun making all of them. And that's the thing is, like, I'm making them as a player because I just, like, started figuring out how to, like, format and, like, print off some of that stuff. But, like, so I had so much fun knowing they were, like, about to pop up or working on each unique one, and everybody's reactions when they showed up. They're excellent little pieces of the world. And even better if you have somebody in your play group or have a friend or acquaintance with any artistic ability who can do little sketches of the characters that can show up on each wanted poster. If we had somebody that could do wanted poster style illustrations, I should just talk to Jocelyn. I guarantee you she'd be willing to try.
She'd absolutely try.
That's a super fun way for the Robin Hood style rogue in your party, is to have those wanted posters start showing up in the world and them always talking about how they never get his face right. That's going to be a good moment. I'm going to close this.
Yeah. Normally we close the door, but in case the AC kicks on and there's noise. Crazy the difference. But yeah, wanted posters are another awesome example. A great handout you can have. Fairly low effort a lot of the time. That I think is like as much of a like moment in the game as it is when like someone gets it, especially if it's for another of one of the party members. Are like, I got a conversation to have.
Yep.
But it's also just like a memento for that player of the campaign to look back and be like, it's my wanted poster from this campaign. And you should absolutely have a corkboard or something in your game room where you hang that kind of stuff.
Well, and they're low effort enough that, you know, as that player's crimes get more extravagant and get longer and longer, you can make longer and longer wanted posters. And that becomes such a wonderful running joke, is like, you know, constantly getting the updated wanted posters, and they're just getting longer and longer until now it's 2 sheets, you know, glued together to just get like, slowly getting longer, and the price is going up and up. And then that's helping at the same time to drive elements of the story as you are dealing with stronger and stronger bounty hunters or more extreme measures being taken by various authorities to try and, you know, bring this rascal in. You know, and, you know, when a group of bounty hunters much stronger than the last group shows up, and what they've got is a wanted poster 2 sheets long, you know, that's signed by the magistrate. That's such a wonderful reveal for the DM to hold that up, and it's this
slap
long.
it on the table.
You know, or do the thing where he holds it up and then it unrolls. Like, that's a lot of fun, and like, it's such a low effort handout. Like, writing riddles can be relatively hard. Making maps can be relatively hard. Wanted posters are really pretty easy.
Yeah.
And they add a lot to any campaign that they're in.
Another little handout thing that if you're a nerd and have a lot of nerd stuff hanging around your cave of games, another thing that we've done in the past for original Dracos campaign is like I had a player who had a kind of assortment of just nerdy weapons and things along those lines, who was like, if you want to use any of this stuff as visuals, you can. And he had this like dragon dagger thing, this like actual metal dagger that had like this dragon inlay, and I absolutely described a dead body and described this dagger sticking out of it, that the players then took, and it ended up being a thing that was being used to scry on them later on in the game. And it was a plot important thing, but just physically picking up a knife and showing what's stuck in the back of somebody is a cool little easy thing to do if you already have that kind of stuff anyways.
Don't hand it to irresponsible players. But
yeah, and you know, if the handout is like the murder weapon and you're doing like this gritty noir, don't like take a loaded actual handgun and like toss it across to somebody. Like, don't be an idiot with sharp or potentially deadly items.
To quote my great-grandfather and great-grandmother, you better be careful with that. I don't want you putting a hole in the brand new roof of our house. Shut up, woman. It ain't loaded. Bang! As he shoots a hole through the
roof of their
brand new roof of their house. Yeah.
Turns out, no matter how old you are, just don't play around with things that can kill you. But those kind of things can be pretty easy physical handouts to just like add a little pow moment that you don't have to go out of your way to get.
If you're old enough to drink at your play table, pick up a bottle of wine, mock up your own label for it online, print it off, and glue it over the regular label to present to the party as something in universe.
Yeah.
Like,
if you've got friends who brew alcohol and you're doing a Star Wars campaign, they can show up with their blue milk power, like distilled Powerade, and that can be a drink shared around the table with the group.
It was Gatorade, blue Gatorade, fermented and then distilled into 50 proof liquor, but they're 100 proof, 50%. That's neither here nor there. But it's, you know, visuals and handouts can very much take that form of just one-off reveals, one-off moments that you just give to the players to examine. There's tons of places you can buy just bags of fantasy coins.
And even just having,
you know, fake glass gemstones.
Just get a bag that looks like a money pouch that kind of makes sense, and put a bunch of normal coins in it, tie it off, and then whenever the person tosses a bag of coins to them, toss a bag of coins on your table and have that like clanky thud happen, and it just is a little extra.
Or just toss it towards the players, and they either get the cool like one-handed catch moment, or they just fumble it.
And then that's canon. That's what happens.
You know, and reading letters and stuff, or being given letters, maps, those kind of handouts, gives players very direct role-playing opportunities. If you're playing a character who's either illiterate or doesn't read well, you don't get the same effect of the DM just like reading, you find this letter on the body, here's what it says, and it's like, well, somebody else had to read it because I can't read. It's much more fun to have the letter tossed down on the table and pick it up and go,
yeah.
And that's, like, they actually get to look at it, go cross-eyed, and pass it off to somebody else, or sit there and pretend to struggle to read it until somebody else takes it away from them. It's entirely vessels for storytelling moments, for RPG moments.
And it gives the player, it gives you as a DM a chance to rest your vocal cords. The player will get to read off their wanted poster or read their letter. It also gives the person who finds it the chance to be deceptive or misleading if they're the kind of character who would.
Absolutely.
If you hand them the letter and the letter divulges something about their edgy rogue backstory that they don't want to say until they've got a better backlighting to share it with the party, they can choose to be like, oh, I'm going to skip that sentence. I'm going to just, it basically says this, and then tuck it in their pocket, or not share the stuff that's damning about them.
Or the noble knight gets the wanted poster and doesn't share it. Receives a stack of letters from their keep, which includes, one letter about how the keep's doing, one letter from a contact that they talked to looking for information, and the third one's a wanted poster for one of the party members that gives them the option to like flip through everything. Maybe they're just pocketing that for later. Like, it's like, I'm gonna bring this up to the rogue when it can be just the two of us later, but I'm not just gonna hold this up so the rest of the party can see and go, what's this?
Because the ranger will absolutely turn it in.
Right, like, it gives everybody at the table sort of those opportunities. More likely than not, that wanted poster just comes out in the open, but maybe it doesn't, and that gives rise to really excellent story moments just across the board, and they're going to be player driven and very authentic because it's an actual handout that one person has to choose to share or to withhold.
Nice.
You want to talk about crazy?
Let's talk about
top examples.
Taking this to an extreme and what that looks like. What are some of the bigger, more elaborate handouts out there that you could do?
I think to some degrees the 2 foot by 3 foot sheet of parchment handmade map is on the extreme end. But a lot of people really enjoy making them. I'm certainly one of them. I would clear off our whole game room table back when it was that weird sunroom bolted onto the back of the house, just surrounded by D&D rule books and swords on the walls and all sorts of stuff, and I'd crack a beer and sit down with a couple of pens, a couple of pencils, and this huge sheet of parchment and just spend hours just tracing out a coastline that I kind of liked, and trying to put legends and stuff and play around with the fonts. It's a lot of effort. It's a lot of space you need to fill with something in order for the map to look authentic. And you want there to be enough on that map to drive a full campaign. As well as you want any clues you're leaving in the map to be relatively well hidden. You don't want a player to look at your map and go, okay, well, there's something weird going on here, there's something weird going on here, and the ancient lost city's over here in this mountain range. Because that is where the ancient lost city is over in that mountain range. Because now it's sort of disappointing that you looked at the map and just figured that out. It makes you feel smart.
Not different. Hadrian was a very good detective. And I knew you very well. That was maybe mixing player and character knowledge.
But it does also give rise to sort of that potential of, like, you can hide little Easter eggs and secrets in there because either individuals amongst your playgroup or, like, your playgroup has the very specific knowledge base it needs in order to get the joke or find certain clues because of just what they tend to look for. Another example, and this is one of my personal favorites, despite the immense amount of effort that is required, is writing out the whole book. Because that's the thing, right? You find the cult leader's journal. You You find this ancient text that
And then they
becomes
roll
important for the rest
investigation,
of the campaign.
and you give them the 2-sentence blurb of relevant information.
If at all possible, it is so much more fun for them to find the cult leader's journal and you hand them a whole leather-bound journal. And that's it. Any relevant information found over the course of the rest of that campaign requires somebody to dive into that book and find it. The one specifically that I did was half ancient text, half cult leader's journal. In the half ancient text, I wrote down in runes so that it wasn't just readable at a glance. It's got a couple, the occasional diagram. It's got this really old map tucked into the cover. In the first half of the second half of the book, it's like this cult leader's journal and talking about their experiments and kind of some of what they're looking for. They can just glance through, but the actual book itself, the text that is going to give all this important story information, the players couldn't just read. Somebody had to sit down and translate the whole damn thing.
Mm-hmm.
Which was an immense amount of effort for me making the thing. It's somewhere over there.
It's in the pile over there, yes.
And a lot of so much fun to present it, and a lot of fun for you guys to translate it and start piecing together the story, because the little bits that you guys began translating just start slowly revealing more and more, and it starts connecting to stuff you've seen in the world and this story stuff that you're on, and it really it leads to some really cool, really organic reveals, as well as the effort you guys had to go through to find somebody who could translate the book, who essentially just gave you a different book and was man, go translate it yourself. And that introduced a really cool character who has continued to show up, shall we say.
Yeah. I'm Matthew. I'm not Hadrian right now.
But you're talking about an immense amount of effort, and we live in an age. There's no reason that I'm exploring this. I'm not working on this for any active campaigns or anything.
Of course.
But we live in an age where you can get a book published through Barnes & Noble for not all that much. You can get a hardback book if you have the document. Just print it out for you for relatively cheap. And you don't need to buy 1,000 of them. You don't need to buy 500 of them. You can buy one of them for an affordable price.
They don't use a printing press anymore. It's pretty efficient to make these things.
And, it's... if you have the desire and have the ability to sit down and write 50,000 words in world that it has some clues and stuff to it, and you have a playgroup where somebody is actually going to read this thing and find the information that they need, that feels like effort well spent to me. Absolutely. It's a lot of effort, but that's really fun to have players encounter a book in universe and be handed that book, a physical copy of it that they then have to read and sort through in order to find all the information they're looking for or find whatever advice it has. If you have the ability, hand binding a book is certainly possible. The one attempt that I've given at it is okay. What I've made it pretty happy with. I think it's really cool. That'll show up in a campaign on the channel in the future. But it's an immense amount of effort, and that book in particular, which is a monster hunting manual, is written a very specific way. Each entry is written out the same way, and there's a lot of sort of detail and style to it. And that just, again, it's ticking up the effort. It's ticking up the amount of time that you have to spend on it. And at the end of the day, you just have to balance or decide what that balance is for you of the campaign that it's going to be in, the amount of time that thing's going to be in the campaign, and how much time and effort you're going to have to put into getting it made. And a lot of people aren't going to feel like it's worth it.
And it's an important decision-making point, kind of twofold. One, that you're somebody who enjoys doing these things. Mm-hmm. Because don't drag yourself through 50,000 words of work if you're someone who will be miserable every step of the way. But I think, by and large, the kind of people who enjoy being a game master are the kind of people who enjoy making things, at least akin to that, maybe not to that extreme. Also, if you're going to make something like that, be confident and comfortable that you have a play group who will enjoy it. A thing like the book, like the monster hunting book, is awesome, a ton of effort. But pretty much any group would be like, oh, that's all. Oh, we know that we're hunting one of these. Let me flip to that section of the book, and they'll look it up, and that's not much effort. But you knew that your group of players included Matty G when you made half of a book that was untranslated runes, and you were like, I know of somebody in this group is going to snatch this, even though my character was absolutely the one who would have done that.
And I figured there was a high chance that you would also just desire to see.
I would also enjoy that, but when I saw the way Matty G's eyes lit up as you set it down, and he was like, I could translate this, I definitely, he was more excited to do it than me. I would have also enjoyed doing it, but if you have that player, then you will absolutely, in the group message for the next 3 weeks, get the, this just came up, I just translated this, and you see all of us going crazy talking about what this could mean for the grand plot and the grand things at play at large here. So make sure it's something that you will enjoy making, at least somewhat, that your effort won't feel like it's grinding, that it'll feel like it's rewarding in the process of making it. And know that if it's something that requires effort from the players, that it'll be effort that's enjoyable for them.
And if your players aren't going to pay attention to visuals, if they're not going to look at the map, if they're not going to read the letter, there's no point in putting even the cursory amount of work it requires to print something off on plain white printer paper. Like, if you're going to just hand it to your players and they're just going to ignore it, don't even put that level of effort into it. But a good play group is going to appreciate those handouts, and they're going to appreciate the effort that went into really crazier handouts. I mean, there's tons of tutorials out there for making puzzle boxes, for making like all sorts of like really crazy or complex things. And if you want to try your hand at that, if that sounds like something you'd enjoy, by all means go for it. That is going to pay off. But you can even just like buy relatively cheap puzzle boxes online. If you have that $15 to throw away on your campaign, that can be a really fun moment of the players having to actually fiddle with the puzzle box in order to try and unlock it. And then it kind of removes the whole just random chance rolling an int check or rolling a dex check and seeing who's able to do it. Like, it's everyone, it's people sitting there fiddling with it and trying to get it, and all of a sudden it's the barbarian player who's just like manages to get it unlocked. And that's a fun story moment.
When the rogue who's master trap disarmer is like, hey, how'd you do that? When that player's been sitting there fiddling with it for a long time. And if, like, the cool thing about visuals to me is it's a really good time and example of like what your stuff is that you're good at, you can apply to it no matter what. If you're an illustrator, you can put that into effect in a way that's super rewarding. If you're a writer, you can use that skill set. If you're someone who's got 3D printing, machining, any of those kinds of backgrounds, and has the ability to craft that kind of stuff, you can go ham with it and make some crazy device that only you could make with your skill set. And it's entirely like you can really lean into that skill set and use it to your advantage, whatever it is, because everybody has stuff that they like to do and they're good at.
And it's so varied, as you just said. I mean, songwriting, graphic design, like poetry, like anything and everything can, like any of those artistic skills, and art is an extremely broad term, it encompasses a lot of things, can be used to really great effect. And if there's something you want to learn to do or want to try and do, we live in an excellent age of so much of that knowledge just being available for free online now, in like quite often in very basic formats, as well as a lot of just free resources. There are really good free map making, like fantasy map making softwares out there now. There's, really good ways to make sort of graphic design stuff for free online, or plenty of free, word processing software. Or you can, write everything out by hand if you have to. It's visuals and handouts are, you can sink a ton of money into them if you want, but they can be done essentially for free and at essentially any scale.
Yes. And there's a lot of variety in what you can make, and you can really lean into what you enjoy making and what you have skill to make. and make that be what you focus on, while also making more broad things. Because anybody can make a wanted poster, like you were saying. Anybody can make the letter. You may not be an expert author who can make it sound super in-world or something like that, but it doesn't take much effort to just write out a 5 or 6 sentence blurb of the information that would have been shared from a potential business partner or whatever that gets sent out, and then just staining a piece of paper that you write that on with a pen and handing it to your players.
Well, and unless you do really weird things, write a letter from a goblin and make a concerted effort to not spell a single word right, but still try and get the point across, or just leave it to the players to try and figure out what the goblin was trying to say. It lets you really play around with your own world in weird and wonderful ways. As well as really lending itself to creative problem solving in just a whole variety of crazy and cool ways.
And I think that's another good thing to talk about, is using visuals specifically in the case of puzzles, traps, etc. You have a huge variety of what you can do with that. I think oftentimes traps are just, do they notice it? No. They step on a trigger plate. They hit a tripwire. That's the puzzle. But if you can come up with or find online countless examples of interesting visual puzzles, and it can be something as simple as you have an array of things and an array of information, and the players have to cross-compare these things and find the inconsistencies. And that's how they're able to be like, well, this is inconsistent with this, so something's here. And then in character, they start to investigate that. And it's something that you can't translate verbally,
right,
without just saying, make an investigation check. You notice that the dragon in the legend has 2 great horns, but on the picture it has 4. If you have a little blurb about the dragon and the portrait of the dragon, and you have that difference there, they're like, wait a second, these are 2 different dragons. And now there's this oh wow, and that's I noticed that as a person, instead of you rolled the check, okay, let me describe to you what it is.
Well, and it saves you as the game master from having to read the clue 40 or 50 times, which you will inevitably have to do if you don't have it written out in some capacity. Even if it's written on the back of a note card, at least then the players have it to reference. Somebody can sit there and look at it and mull it over. You don't have to just constantly repeat it every time the players are looking for clues in the riddle or in whatever sort of markings were left behind. As well as it lets you do much more complex and much more interesting traps and puzzles, which should sometimes be the point. You want to make puzzles and traps that are interesting, but that players can figure out, and you can't do that if you're just, having them make intelligence checks or having to constantly repeat the riddle every time and constantly describe the panel that they're looking at. You want that moment where your players get into the middle of a room following the clues for the trap, only to realize that they don't actually know
the entire time.
And they don't actually know how the trap works. And they have to sort of go back and reevaluate now. That's a much better moment than the players make an intelligence check, don't quite roll high enough, walk into the middle of the room and trigger the trap. That feels sort of cheap in a lot of ways. Whereas if the players are confident they figured it out, march bravely forward, and then set off the trap, that feels like it's on them. That doesn't feel like it was just the dice took a bad bounce and now we're taking a bunch of damage. It's more of okay, we misunderstood something and now we're taking damage, so let's step back and reevaluate.
And like you said, it allows things to be more complex without you being miserable, repeating yourself constantly as the person running the game. If you want a complex key of multiple different things that have lots of different pieces to them that need to be cross-compared or whatever, understood in some way, you can hand that as a piece of paper to your party so they know, oh, this is what I know about this. Now I can just double check this when I'm looking at this stuff, instead of having to be like, wait, with the dragon portrait, how many horns did that one say it had for the red one? Okay, that many, all right. And then you said how many were on the picture? And instead of having to constantly double check, and you have to look at your notes, you just hand them the notes. You just say, here's the key, figure it out. And it can be a much more rewarding experience across the
Well,
board.
and you have to remember that, like, in video games and media like that, the vast majority of traps are visual.
Mm-hmm.
And that gives them a flow that a lot of tabletop RPG traps don't have. Traps and puzzles are quite often where players get bogged down the worst in the course of a traditional dungeon adventure. Apart from combat, which, at least in something like Dungeons & Dragons, tends to be very slow. You can have players stuck on a simple puzzle for a very long time because they're missing a vital piece of information or because they're just not understanding a piece of information. And that tends to get worse if they don't have it in front of them.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, having the pieces in front of them to figure it out tends to help the problem-solving or puzzle-solving process significantly.
And it makes it so that you can just make a fun moment where people are solving a puzzle that isn't contingent on them rolling well.
Yes.
You don't have to be good at Arcana to figure out this trap, this magical effect. You might be able to just figure it out by cross-section, comparing the notes that you have and the information you have. You might give them better or more thorough information if they're better at a check or something that'll make it easier. You give them the second sheet that gives an extra little bit of information, but it gives them a chance to figure it out the hard way, and that's that can be a really rewarding process if a party, instead of just you rolled well enough, you succeed. Instead, it's we were smart enough collectively and thought through this well enough that we succeeded.
And, we've mentioned before that players like feeling clever, and anything you can do as a game master to help players feel clever is time well spent. This is a excellent example of that. Players actually solving it for themselves with the pieces in front of them helps everybody at the table to feel clever, to feel smart for figuring it out. And you just don't get that same result if you're not using visuals or handouts in any way.
I think that's we're pretty close. We might actually be a little under on this one. Is there anything else you're wanting to discuss with these?
I just think that, like, the more effort you put into it, by and large, will be worth it. If you have a good play group, you will see that effort sort of returned in some way. And if you enjoy making it, or if you can find the sort of visuals and handouts and stuff that you like making, then it's just always going to be worth it. It's never going to be the wrong decision to actually make something in sort of a physical version. Players really enjoy it. You will really enjoy handing it to your players.
And like you said, with the right person making it and people receiving it, it will be a overall positive and fun and cool experience for everybody involved. So do more. Make more. If you already use them, use more. If you don't use any, start using some. Start making them. And you can start off with the easy stuff. Like we said, you can print off a wanted poster. You can find an interesting font, print off a letter, and tea stain it, and then now it looks like an old school letter. That's easy enough to do. It does not take a lot of time, not a lot of effort, and will be so worth it. And I think that as you start implementing that into your game, you'll see the payout coming off of people getting to see that and have that moment, and you'll want to do more.
And the more of it you do, the more of it you think you can do.
The better you'll get it.
It's once you start making visuals and handouts, and you start figuring out a few small tricks and figuring out how to do certain things, all of a sudden it starts expanding very quickly of like, I bet I could do this. I bet I could figure out a way to do a version of this thing. I bet I could make one of these for my party. And that's a really fun place to be in, is like that kind of constant problem solving and like creativity stage of just like knowing that you're starting to figure some stuff out and starting to get pretty good at a few small things just really broadens the horizons in terms of what you can make. And then you start kind of dipping your toes into other artistic stuff in order to try and make the stuff that you can make, or you start leveraging other people's talents in order to make things better. And the more people that are involved, the better. The cooler stuff gets.
Absolutely. And you don't have to be a master at any of these things in order to try and make them. Neither of us are artistically inclined in the terms of drawing very much. Neither of us are calligraphers. You have quite a bit of writing experience and enjoy writing, but that doesn't mean you know how to use a calligraphy pen and make these crazy elaborate letters.
No, absolutely
But you can look stuff up and figure out how to make things look the way you want it, or find a font that can make things look the way you want it. And it's just, you put a little effort in there and then put the time and stuff into making something cool. it'll pay off.
Absolutely.
So use more. Hope you found this useful, found this helpful, found this interesting. I hope that you enjoyed it as well. We enjoyed it. Hope you did. If you're on YouTube watching this and want to throw a comment down of like the favorite handout you've ever given or received, I'd love to see if anyone's got like a specific handout moment, something they put a lot of time and effort in, or saw someone put a lot of time and effort in and had the cool payoff. Please share that in the comments. And thank you for watching and listening to the bonus action.
I think this counts as a handout and a visual.
This is... Costigan's reaction to that was so amazing. Where he's like, oh, okay, look at that. And then just, like, busted up. Oh. I just love, like, he's like, I hand him this and ask him, like, you guys kind of were doing table talk at the same time.
Right.
So I was able to just kind of, like, quickly turn around, grab at that, sketch that little thing out on it, and then just throw
it's
it
like,
out.
it's like I'm definitely, like, paying attention to this conversation with the crazy fish man. But it's like, also, it's like, all right, we've got two, it's like, we all across the board feel like, at this point, 2 sessions in, we're pretty confident something is driving creatures up from the Underdark. And it's like, and that's going to be an important, whatever that is, that's going to be an important story moment of like, there's something down there that is starting to drive things up out of the Underdark and sort of into the city. That's something we'll probably have to deal with way down there, whatever it is. And it's like, Costigan's like an ocean of ball bearings. It's like, all right, we've got 2 working theories. It's a giant throwing rocks into the sea to raise the sea level. To flood the world, or
a sea of ball bearings.
Or a sea of ball bearings.
That's the only 2 options it could be.
Well, it's our 2 options currently. It's the it's either in one of the Batman films or in one of the Spider-Man films where it's the like it shows a board at the police station and then they've got like top suspects or whatever, and it's a picture of Abraham Lincoln and Bigfoot because they're like, we got fuck all for leads. No here's our top suspects right now. It's just as likely as anyone else.
Pretty much.
That's where we are.
How mad would you guys be if you get to the Underdark, find the sea after like months and months of exploration, only to find out that there's literally a giant throwing rocks into a sea trying to get it to raise up to flood the world?
Do you want my honest answer?
Yeah.
My honest answer is I fully expect that is what's happening because you do this type of thing a lot where it's like complete batshit insanity and everyone's like, yeah, whatever, crazy prophet of doom fish man, and then we get there and it's like, oh my god, the crazy prophet of doom fish man was right.
You might be onto something here.
So at the moment, I'm like
that is the working theory.
I'm like 75% certain that the sea level is rising because of giants throwing rocks in. At the very least, the sea level is probably rising for some reason.
Or maybe it's just a crazy fishman. Who knows? That's the lovely thing about crazy characters is just because they're crazy doesn't mean they're wrong. But it might. It very well might.